Hello and welcome to episode 90 of the Alfa Romeo Driver podcast, brought to you by the Alfa Romeo Owners Club. I'm Guy Swarbrick, and this month we're doing things a little differently. I sat down with club management team member and MiTo nerd David Faithful for a half-hour chat about the new STLA Large platform that'll underpin the replacements for the Giulia and Stelvio. And by the time we'd finished, we had over an hour of material. So we've split it into two roughly half-hour-long episodes, which we've made available at the same time. So if you listen on your drive to work or simply don't want to listen to the two of us waffling on for an hour, you can listen to the two episodes separately. Or if you're a glutton for punishment with nothing better to do, you can listen to them back to back. The first part is really about the benefits of platform sharing and the history of platform sharing at Alfa Romeo up to the Tonale. And episode 91 will cover the upcoming Milano and the STLA Large announcement. They should make sense as a pair or separately, or at least they should make as much sense individually as they do together. So, on with the show. Good afternoon, David.
Good afternoon, Guy.
So the first thing we should do is give apologies. It sounds like it's a formal meeting, but we were hoping to have Jamie Porter, magazine regular and owner of the Alfa Workshop, with us. But Jamie, unfortunately, has COVID. So get well soon, Jamie.
Yes, best wishes from us both.
Yeah. So without Jamie's expertise, we're now going to have a conversation about platform sharing and ultimately about the recent announcement of the STLA Large platform, which is what will underpin the new Giulia and Stelvio. We're going to take a slightly long-winded route to get there, just to give a little bit of context. So I guess you could argue, I think the first Alfa, not Alfa Romeo, back in 1910, came from the factory with a body on. But pretty much all of the pre-war cars were just built and sold by Alfa Romeo as a platform with an engine.
Yeah, I mean, you used to be able to order and buy chassis, plus or minus suspension, plus or minus engine, tailored engine, and so on. And then it was quite normal to go to a coach builder of your choice. And that was, how you configured a car back there. And it was the same with the racing cars as well. It wasn't you didn't go into a showroom and buy a fully fledged, fully prepared racing car. You bought the chassis, you bought the engine, you built or bought the suspension, and then a coach builder or a motorsport team built you the body for it. So, I mean, platform sharing, I suppose, depends how far you want to go back, but certainly platform buying, platform sharing, engine sharing has been around since the beginning of time, really, certainly from the almost very beginnings of Alfa Romeo.
Yeah, and certainly, there's a sense that there's a difference between platform sharing. It's okay for Alfa to platform share with another Italian brand, whether it's Maserati or Fiat or whoever, but it's a bit beyond the pale to do that with a non-Italian brand. But I think there were quite a few James Young-bodied Alfa Romeos, so there were actually English Alfa Romeos,
and they're some of the most expensive ones to acquire now into your collection. So
there were 9 to my collection.
Yeah, your collection, obviously, I don't have storage room. But I think I've got a feeling that people tend to, and I don't want to belittle what people say. This might just be a thing that's become common on social media. But you see a picture of of the new Milano or a Tonale, and they say, "Oh, that's just a Peugeot," or "That's just a whatever it is." And of course, when we talk about platform share, we're talking about the platform. Frankly, the bits you can't see, everything underneath. Manufacturers rarely, even if they're part of the same group as many manufacturers are within Stellantis, they're rarely sharing body panels or dashboards or headlinings. And when you look at many of the cars that have had platform sharing, they have completely different bodies, completely different interiors, completely different electronics and electrics, completely different design styles, and also they, Alfa Romeo in particular, basically sort of make any adjustments, fundamental changes or redesigns of that shared platform. And that's been common over the decades as well. So it's not like they just adopt a platform and don't make any changes. Alfa have never really done that, I don't think.
No, we'll talk about a couple of examples of that. I mean, I guess once you get past the coach building era and cars become unibody with the bodywork welded to a one-piece chassis, you get a lot of what I think at the time was talked about more as sharing the same floor pan rather than platform. So it was literally the floor and the sills and maybe some bulkheads, but not much more than that. But even with the scope of that, if you think about the 105, you had the original Giulia saloon as made famous by the Italian job. You had all the Bertoni coupes, 4 generations of Spider, the Berliner, the GTA, Junior Zagato, Montreal, all sharing the same fundamental floor pan.
Yeah.
But there's not much in common between a Montreal and a Giulia saloon.
No, but it does have the advantage, and people tend to forget this, that we sort of live in a world where we love all the old Alfas and we sort of question all the new direction and EVs and so on. And I do understand why we're stuck in our ways like that. But there's a huge advantage of the platform sharing of some of those fundamental mechanical items that a part that fits a 105 Spider will possibly also fit, a 1750 GT Veloce. There's a lot of interchangeable parts that in future is beneficial from platform sharing. So although we sort of, we make a big noise about, I'm not sure that we should be sharing a platform with a Peugeot. Well, actually, and, I hate to dive straight into the MiTo. The MiTo has a shared platform with many other models. It has fundamental differences, but it does mean if I can't find a certain part, chances are I could find one for a Jeep Renegade or a Fiat 500L or, God forbid, a Corsa D, and it would probably bolt onto my MiTo. So there are, as time progresses and as cars get older, there are some significant advantages in terms of maintenance of a car with that platform sharing as well. And we shouldn't really overlook that, I don't think.
And that goes back a long way. It's definitely been incredibly useful for 105 owners. And 75 and Alfetta owners to a certain degree. And I even managed to source a couple of bits for my Alfa Sud Sprint from Nissan dealers because they were the same as they were on the Arna and the Cherry Europe. No, and we'll come back to the MiTo because I think there's been a couple of sort of milestones. There's been lots of platform sharing, as we've said, from the 101 and the 105 onwards. But I think there's been a couple of distinct changes. So the first one I wanted to talk about was the 164. And I think what's significant about the 164 in Alfa's platform sharing history is it was the first time, although they'd manufactured Renaults in Italy, it was the first time there'd been a situation where Alfa had collaborated with other manufacturers to build a car on a common platform. So the Lancia Tamer, Fiat Croma, Saab 9000 and the 164 were nominally the same platform. And I know that's not strictly true because the Arna, which we've already mentioned, was a collaboration with Nissan. But the scale of the Tipo Quattro project across 3 manufacturers and 4 brands was new to Alfa, relatively new to the industry and absolutely the shape of things to come. But as you hinted earlier, I think one of the things that's fascinating about that project is the Alfa engineers, having been committed by the kind of senior management of the business, wholeheartedly went into the project and said, I don't really like that, and changed the suspension setup. The front suspension's completely different. It was the only one of the 4, I think, that didn't use exactly the same doors as the other 3. Even the floor pan's not exactly the same.
No.
You did get some of that part sharing benefit that you talked about, and it was probably slightly cheaper than developing the whole thing from scratch. But there really isn't very much in common between a Saab 9000 and a 164, or even a Croma and a Tamer and a 164.
No, and to be fair, it wasn't just Alfa. Both Alfa Romeo and Saab had a bit of a thing about completely re-engineering and reinventing the wheel, regardless of cost and regardless of whether they'd then retrieve or recover any of that money. And I think both have suffered over the decades of that kind of approach. That's for sure. But yeah, if you look both at and underneath a 164, there's not a lot of Fiat Croma or Lancia in there. There's a bit of Saab, but not very much. I mean, they sort of took platform sharing to the opposite of extreme, whatever that word is, i.e. let's share a platform and now let's completely reconfigure it, redesign it and change it fundamentally, regardless of cost, because we can. So yeah, it's fine in theory. There's 4 cars there and they're all 4, the Saab 9000, I don't want to sort of, go off track. I've probably done 500,000 miles in Saab 9000s. They were absolutely brilliant cars for what they were designed to be. The Lancia Tamer, I thought was a fabulous car. I've never ever driven a Fiat Croma, I have to confess. So
I had one. I had one as a courtesy car when I had an Alfa in for a service at the now departed Black and White garage in Newbury.
Oh yeah.
And I remember taking it back, and the guy asked what I thought of it, and I said it was loose. I mean, pretty much all of it was falling apart, but
yeah,
it was a high mileage old.
I was going to say loan
courtesy car. Yeah. So,
but anyway, so I have driven a number of 164s, V6 and twin sparks, and I've owned and driven a lot of Saabs. But they are fundamentally different cars. I mean, we talk about platform sharing, and in the social media world, we just say, oh, it's a Peugeot, or oh, this or oh, that. But I mean, those cars are fundamentally different. And I suspect 99% of all people have no clue that those four cars have got anything in common.
Yeah.
And as you say, in terms of the 164, they don't have a lot in common with the other cars, frankly.
We sometimes forget how old we are. 99% of people wouldn't even know what those four cars were.
Yes, that's probably
true. But of
true.
the people who know about those four cars.
Yeah, a very small proportion would know they're on a platform share, other than the nerdy car people like us.
Yeah. So then there's another switch, I think, with the 155. And there's a lot of people with a real soft spot for the 155 now. And I think part of that is through the motor racing heritage.
Yeah.
I had one. I really like mine. But I think the big difference with the 155 was there was a lot more Tipo, Tempra, Dedra in the 155 than there had been evidence of platform sharing in the 164. The body obviously completely different engines.
Yeah.
But in terms of the way everything was set up, it felt like it was a lot more constrained by having been built on the same platform.
Well, it was probably, I'll have to check my history actually, but it was probably a reflection of the financial stability or position of Alfa Romeo at the time as well, wasn't it? And Fiat.
Yeah.
My guess is that, much as they may have liked to have done their usual completely starting afresh with their own designs, there probably just wasn't the money. There wasn't the available funding to do that. And they probably, if I were one of the designers or one of the engineers back then, I would probably have felt I was compromised. However, I mean, the end result was still a brilliant car. The Dedra was.
It was. And they went back and uncompromised it a bit with the wide body version later on. So they kind of did get the opportunity to Alpharize it a bit more later in its life.
And I suppose that's maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but for me, I've got no issue with platform sharing. And I think there's enormous numbers of benefits, and they can create absolutely brilliant cars. And I'm not in the camp of, and perhaps I'm the wrong person to have on this call. Perhaps Jamie would have put me in my place. But there have been a number of absolutely brilliant cars, not just Alfa and not just Italian, that are the result of platform sharing. They're still absolutely wonderful machines and beautiful designs and so on. So I'm not sure what we were trying to achieve with this podcast, but I'm certainly not in a place where I think it's a bad thing and here's our argument for or against.
You're right that it's not an Alfa thing. I think I read somewhere earlier on that the VW MQB platform has something like 27 different vehicles that have been built on it.
Right.
The Tiguan to the Seat Ateca to the Audi Q3 and, Audi A3 and pretty much everything in between, Seat Leon, all built fundamentally from the same platform with a huge variation in the type of vehicle. And that was kind of where I was going next in the Alfa chronology, was to talk about the MiTo.
Just to touch on your point there about VW though, VW can go to market in a matter of months, whereas Alfa, and we all complain about this, we have to die of old age over years and years and years before the next new Alfa model comes out. And fundamentally and historically, a lot of that is to do with they start all over again with, designing a car from the ground up. Whereas the concept of platform sharing not only gives you those economies of scales and reduced development costs and so on, but it's such a faster time to market. So those 30 or 40 cars that VW have launched over the last 20 years, all basically on the same platform, they're so much faster to market. And if we, as it looks like Stellantis are now, got much smarter with configurable and usable platforms across multiple different types of vehicles, then our time to market just gets shorter and shorter. And that's another world from where we've been for decades with Alfa. Much as we love Alfa Romeo, I am a little bit bored of waiting for the next model. And we've just spent years and years waiting for the next model. And then, in 2015, Giulia comes out and we all, we're in delight, but it's been donkey's years since 2015, hasn't it? So, it's a slow process if you're not able to quickly get to market on the basis of a shared and configurable platform that's almost good to go.
Yeah, and I think two follow-on points on that. One is you talked about the buzz on social media about whether platform sharing is a good or a bad thing. It's often the same people who bemoan how long it takes Alfa to get a model out and the limited number of models in the range, who are then also anti-platform sharing, which is the best way to fix that. The other thing that I think is worth bearing in mind is if you look at the Opel range, or if you want to nail a budgie on the front of it, the Vauxhall range, since Peugeot took over Stellantis as is now in 2017, they've replaced the entire range.
Yeah.
Every single product is a new product based on a different platform to the platforms they were based on 7 years ago. 6 years ago, realistically.
And I have to say, you'll hate this, the new Opels, Vauxhalls, they are getting very, very good reviews. They are not what you and I might call a driver's car, but my God, if we could sell, 10% of the volumes of some of the Vauxhalls and Opels across Europe, then Alfa Romeo's finances would be in a tremendously better place. So
yeah, and I've heard good things about some of them. I have to say, I had a Grandland as a hire car when my Tonale was in having some work done on it, and that was execrable. It was one of the worst cars I've driven in the last 20 years. But yeah, that's a bit of an aside.
Yeah.
So back to the MiTo. So MiTo,
at last,
yes, officially the GM Fiat small platform, was it?
Yep, small common components shared platform, which was a co-development with GM and Alfa Romeo, but it was developed in Italy, and it was a combination of German and Italian teams developing it. So yes, I think the SCCS platform, as it's known, that formed the basis for an enormous volume of cars over about,
and not just cars as well.
Not just cars, no. Cars and light commercial vehicles. Yeah, so we had obviously the Fiats, Fiat Punto Evo, Alfa Romeo MiTo, but you also had things like Vauxhall Adam.
It's an Opel Adam. There was never anybody called Adam Vauxhall.
Okay. Yeah, we had the Fiorino, Fiat Cubo, Citroen Nemo, Peugeot Bipper, to name but a few. They are basically on the same floor pan with a number of changes, obviously, but in essence, you could, strip off all of the top of a Grand Punto or a Corsa D or a Abarth Punto Evo or a Fiat Cubo, and they'd look pretty similar underneath. They are basically the same underlying platform, but Alfa, like always, they made numerous changes for the Alfa Romeo, but it's a robust platform and has been used, reused, and enhanced and changed and widened and made four-wheel drive over the years. And it's basically lasted about 15 years. It's a really good example, let's say, of how platform sharing can enable different manufacturers, either within partnership or part of the same group, to get to market, to get economies of scale, to save production costs, to share power plants and all that malarkey. So yeah, I think the MiTo it's a very small, how many MiTos are made? 263,000. That's tiny compared to Corsas or even the light commercial vehicles, and tiny compared to the Punto Evo. But yeah, I think it's a really good example of how a shared platform can benefit all parties and still produce fabulous little cars, to be honest.
Yeah, and just for balance, I'm going to give an example of probably the best example of platform sharing not working.
Go on.
The 939 platform, so the GM Fiat Premium platform, as it was officially known. So that's a platform that was actually effectively designed and engineered by Saab, and Saab then didn't have the money to build anything on it. Alfa took it and re-engineered large chunks of it and used it in the 159, the Brera and the Spider. And it was also supposed to be used as the replacement for the Insignia chassis for Opel and Vauxhall, and for some US kind of mid-size to large saloons. But because of its Saab origins and its Alfa re-engineering, GM didn't use it because it was too expensive for them to use. So a platform that is officially the GM Fiat premium platform was never used by GM or Fiat, and was only ever used for 3 production cars and a couple of concepts. So it was used for the Opel Insignia concept, but not for the production version. It was used.
Sorry, I was just going to say it was quite big, wasn't it? It was.
Yes, and it was always intended to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the 9.5 saloon platform was what it was originally designed for, as the replacement for the 9.5.
Yeah, because it was around about the time when cars sort of forked. We were busy bimbling along, where you got the 939s and cars of that ilk, the saloons and hatchbacks and so on. And then the road forked ahead, didn't it? A lot of cars went much smaller, and then you went off down the SUV leg, and it seemed at that time, oh, hang on, what's happened? Every other damn car is an SUV or a tiny city car. And that platform was sort of almost, the timing of it felt a bit late with where the markets went, I think.
Well, the size is largely because the premium platform was originally designed to be the platform for the 166, which didn't happen. So it was pressed into service for the 159 to avoid what would have been a phenomenal waste of money. And of course, ironically, Alfa almost walked the same way. The Kamal, the SUV concept that was shown at Geneva in 2003.
Designed by the MiTo designer.
And used the 939 platform. So that was a...
did it? Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was a premium platform vehicle. So it was kind of built to do that, but ended up, ironically, being used on I guess, a relatively long wheelbase coupe and a largish Spider and the 159 and 159 Sport Wagon. So didn't really... nobody got the benefit of platform sharing. I guess the only benefit that Alfa got from platform sharing was that Saab probably carried a lot of the development costs, but there was never any economies of scale from that, which was then made worse by the fact that it was killed early for a variety of reasons. So was really only current from 2005 for the 159 through to 2010, 2011. So it's very short life for a platform. It's not outrageously short for an individual model, but to only be used for one range for 6 or 7 years is the antithesis of why you platform share.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine every 939 sold probably lost Alfa money. They probably wouldn't confess to that, but
well, of course they were quite expensive to build because they were all built by Pininfarina rather than the Brera and the Spider, where the 159s went.
Yeah.
So yeah, I suspect you're right.
The other thing that, just really briefly, because I'm absolutely no expert in this, one of the key things with the small platform was consistency in levels of safety. And I don't propose we go into that in any depth because I bet neither of us know much about it or care very much. But yeah, with the small platform, that was the first in most of those categories of cars that got the 5-star Euro NCAP. And an awful lot of that was the design of the chassis with the crumpling of the chassis legs and so on, which was all, I think there is an argument, though I don't know enough to make the argument, that the platform sharing enables all continental safety regulations to be met with one single platform without having to redesign it for each market and so forth. Yeah. I know that was the case with the small platform MiTo used. It was probably the case with that premium platform for the 939s, and I know it's the case for Giulia and Stelvio platforms as well.
Well, and I guess even if you have to test all the models individually, going into those tests knowing how they're going to perform because they're going to perform the same way as the last one, it would be an advantage in itself,
and a cost saving and economies of scale and time to market and all those good things that we've blathered on about.
Yeah. So I guess if Alfa benefited from Saab platform sharing with the 939, the one that's kind of gone the other way is the all Alfa Skunkworks developed Giorgio platform, which for quite a long time was only used in the Giulia and Stelvio to great acclaim, which is now finding its way as a kind of filler, I guess, really until STLA Large appears. But it's now finding its way into all sorts of other cars as well in other Stellantis brands. So we've got 2 Grand Cherokees, including the Grand Cherokee L, which is enormous, and the Grecale and the Gran Turismo from Maserati, including, ironically, full EV versions.
Yeah, that interests me because I remember some years ago, there was an announcement that says, we're binning off the Giorgio platform. We're going all in with the Stellantis platforms, Stella platforms. And it was because it couldn't be electrified. And then here we are a few years later. We've managed to electrify it. There you go. So I do think there's, I don't know, well, I don't know all the ins and outs of the decision-making that Stellantis took, but it does feel like they haven't quite got the big return on the investment of the Giorgio platform that they might have done had they, investigated whether they could, in essence, transition Giorgio into what has become the Stellantis Large platform. It felt a bit like they started again with a clean sheet of paper, which doesn't feel like it was a good use of investment. But, I mean, maybe there were other limitations that we just don't know about with that Giorgio platform.
I don't know how different the Giorgio platform is underpinning the Grand Cherokee, but I mean that's an E segment vehicle rather than a D segment vehicle, so it is bigger. But whether all of that comes from overhang and just the Cherokee being a bigger car, but I suspect by the end of Giorgio's life, by far the biggest number of vehicles built on the Giorgio platform will end up having been Jeeps, just because that's it's a US market vehicle that's been built in Detroit.
The creation of the Giorgio platform, though, I mean, I'll have to forgive my ignorance of the history, but I do remember it was a bit of a sort of Marchione laying down the law and saying, build me an incredible car for Alfa Romeo. And it was the same with the engineering, the engine, certainly, with the Ferrari collaboration. That term you used of Skunk Works, they probably didn't really care anything at all about future reuse or replatforming. No. It was all about get a brilliant car out and let's show the world what we can do. And that does, as I remember, that was kind of the Marchione, instruction, build something incredible, which they did. But probably not a lot of thought was put into reusability or certainly electrification in the future.
Well, you say that. I've had a conversation with Jamie. It's Jamie's not here to have this bit of the conversation, but Jamie told me that when the EPA documents isn't the right word. For those of you who don't know, EPA is Fiat's electronic workshop manual system. The EPA module for the Giulia first came out when the Giulia was launched. There was all of the component plans and all of the maintenance instructions for a hybrid version of the Giulia.
Interesting.
But it only, as far as I can tell, it only ever existed in EPA. It never...
Got a bit ahead of themselves, obviously.
Yeah. So three more things I want to talk about, really. The next one's Tonale. And we talked about the fact that Tonale is ultimately MiTo derived, although it's the wide, long four-wheel drive version of the platform, which is, I think, barely recognizable from the original MiTo platform. But you hear an awful lot of people, and this is a general thing about platform sharing, who describe the Tonale as being based on the Jeep Compass. And I've had a number of conversations with people from the factory and elsewhere. And chronologically, the Compass was around for a while before the Tonale came along. There were changes to the platform that were made for the Compass, which have been rolled over into Tonale. But there is a real difference, and we've kind of talked about it a couple of times, between platform sharing and badge engineering. Yeah. So to me, and part of this is my long-standing personal bias, but to me, the Vauxhall and Opel is badge engineering. Yeah, there might be some minor trim differences as well as the badge, but they are fundamentally the same cars with the steering wheel on the wrong side. Although the steering wheel's on the same side as an Irish market Opel. So even that's not the distinction, really. But they are the same car.
Yeah, it's kind of a exercise rather than an engineering exercise.
Yeah.
But I mean, to be fair, kind of a swear word, but it's kind of the same with the Tonale and the Dodge Hornet in the US. That's kind of badge engineering rather than platform.
It is. So it's a bit, again, probably slightly more differentiated.
Yeah.
Than the Vauxhall and the Opel, but not much. It's a new front bumper and a new grille section and a badge.
But the thing with that is, certainly to my mind, I know a few Americans, and some of them are Dodge through and through, and some are Chrysler through and through. And, so there's brand allegiance in the US, particularly in muscle cars, but certainly brand allegiance, rather like you and I have with Alfa Romeo. And so a person in North America would never consider buying an Alfa Romeo, but they would absolutely go into the local Dodge dealer and buy a Dodge. And so you can see the brand strategy there is economies of scale and cost of developing a new Dodge and marketing to an existing loyal customer base who will only ever buy a Dodge. They've got a Dodge minivan, they've got a Dodge Viper or a Dodge Charger, or, and they might want an SUV instead of their minivan. Now the kids are growing up, they'll go and buy a Dodge Hornet. They would not set foot in an Alfa Romeo showroom.
No.
So you can see the logic with that, even though us lot, Alfa Romeo aficionados, think it's horrific. But
then from an Alfa Romeo perspective, it keeps people busy in Milano because that's where the Hornet's built.
Yeah.
So I think from a business perspective, it kind of makes sense all around. Because I've sent you some of the stuff through. I've been playing around with Bard today and asking it questions about platform sharing just to see what it came up with. And I asked it 2 consecutive questions. I asked it whether the Tonale was based on the Jeep Compass. And it came back and said, no, not really. There's some shared components, but it's not really fair to say one's based on the other. And then I asked it whether the Hornet was based on the Tonale, and it said, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So even an artificial intelligence can work that one out. And
I think there's a lot to be said for, if you sit in a Jeep Compass, and I have done, I've not driven one, but I've sat in it. They are worlds apart from a Tonale, and you can tell without even driving it, it's going to be slow and wallowy and a bit of a nightmare. And apologies to anyone who owns one or loves Jeep as well.
We always say that's all we have time for this episode, but this time it's literally true. Episode 91 is available to download now and picks up the story again in the Stellantis parts bin. Next month we'll be back to normal, and you'll be able to download episode 92 from 1:30 p.m. on Sunday the 3rd of March. From Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Podcast Addict, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Until then, or for the next couple of minutes if you're going straight into episode 91, stay safe.